Shoots and ladders. Guess the motivation. This is a very fun episode. We love your participation. Please DM us at the Shoots and Ladders. My name is Jason.
I'm Desiree Josen.
This is going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, wrestling is part theater, mixed with art, mixed with obviously what they do in the ring as far as the technical aspect of it. But none of this actually works if the characters aren't created. So this episode is actually going to focus on where did the characters even come from? Where was the motivation behind it? We did our extensive research. And in Dez's case, we're actually able to talk to the source directly to find out where some of these characters came from. All right, so the first one we have is Charles Wright and Papa Shango. The coolest thing about this is you actually were able to speak to him at WrestleCon. So how did he come with Papa Shango?
Yeah. It was really cool because he was in character as well. So when we did speak to him, we were talking to Papa Shango. I never knew the origin of it just because we just assume it was just given to them and they just, that was just who they had to be. He went into this really in-depth story saying that Vince was like, you're going to watch a James Bond movie, the Live and Let Die. One, and he was like, there is a character in there, what was his name, I think it was Baron Samedi, that was the voodoo villain, and he was like, you're gonna watch this, you're gonna take on his characteristics, you're gonna learn the laugh, you're gonna do everything. And that's where he came up with it. He said that's all he did was watch it over and over and learned his characteristics and his mannerisms, and here you have Papa Shango.
and,
How cool
and
is
that's so
that?
that's so cool. And the coolest thing about that is, and it's kind of one of those things. Now, don't get me wrong. I've seen that James Bond before. The character that they're based off of, yeah, totally does resemble him. But one of the coolest things, and we're going to see this theme kind of throughout, is that's where the baseline was. The baseline of, hey, I'm going to paint my face like this guy, or maybe dress like this guy. But from there, it takes on a life of its own.
Mhm.
So this is it was so cool, like how he kind of had that run. He obviously had that specific angle with Ultimate Warrior, and yeah, the rest is history. And now he's etched in it.
Yeah,
All
so
right,
cool.
the next one, this is hilarious because of the origins of the gimmick, and I said this at the time. I, truth be told, I kind of thought that this gimmick was, when they came out, that like he was just going to be a jobber because I didn't think it was going to be over. But with the combination of the popularity of hip hop and everyone else, we're talking about John Cena and his original Thugonomics uh, gimmick, which seems to have come from Marky Mark. So Mark Wahlberg. Obviously, they're both from Boston. I got to be honest with you, I loved it. I thought it was hilarious. I thought he was so funny that it just made me become a fan.
He definitely pulled it off. I think that's what saved him. But I do think it's a mix of Marky Mark. I do know Stephanie McMahon heard him backstage one time rapping like for fun, and um I think it was towards the end of where they were kind of like just grasping for something to make it work with him, and was like you're gonna go out there and you're gonna rap, and if it gets you over, we're gonna keep doing it. And it definitely worked. And I mean, that's all I can think about when I see John Cena
Yeah,
now is you
hundred
can't help it.
100,000%. What's funny is, generally speaking, when someone's kind of given a gimmick like this, it usually doesn't get over as well. It's almost like this guy's a joke, and he's, let's just shoot him aside. Next thing you know, the crowd loves it to the point so much they let him produce a song on his own, which is now a more famous song with the previous one. I love the basic thugonomic song, and he just turns into a life, just a larger than life superstar. And now some people consider one of the greatest of all time. So, wow. Again, going back, the baseline was just something funny, and it turned him into what he is now.
What I think is hilarious is I was watching an interview with a young fan, a young boy, and they were like, "Who's your favorite rapper?" And a lot of us, we think of like Biggie, Tupac. We're thinking of like actual. And this little boy confidently said, John Cena. Like, well, you ain't wrong.
That is so cool. And hey, it worked. So now, speaking of jokes, this turned into a joke. There's a lot of different chatter about what he felt like when the gimmick was presented and then actually executed. I don't think he was necessarily the biggest favorite, but it's now etched into infamy, if you want to call it that. Doink the Clown. Doink the Clown was basically his character was motivated by It the Clown. So he's basically this dark character that, just, and again, this was just turned into a joke. So we can briefly go over this one.
I was never a fan of Doink. He
Yeah.
annoyed me. And it's not that I have a fear of clowns. He just rubbed me the wrong way. And I know that was like the bit was he was supposed to be like that practical joker. And, I don't know. I just never cared for him. I did see in an interview, I think it was with Bruce Pritchard, that he was also inspired by Krusty the Clown from The
Oh, okay.
Simpsons,
Okay.
which
Got
I can sort of see that, but I also see the Pennywise thing as well.
it. Yeah.
But I'm surprised. Well, I'm not surprised that Vince approved it because at that time, Vince was really into those gimmicky
Sure.
characters. So
Yeah.
I guess it worked. I just never cared for him. I didn't like him.
Neither did I. And I remember his previous gimmick was the Skinner, and it was just this creepy guy, just didn't go over. So they gave this to him instead. Um,
Oh my God.
and the thing is, I don't know if he was necessarily on board, but it is what it is. But yeah, no, it's just one of those things. But again, it goes back to show though that like how pop culture, whether it's Krusty or It or anything else, can like kind of influence these guys and kind of put legs to it. And next thing you know, now it's a gimmick.
I mean, it worked because we still remember him. So
True story. All right, next one. And I never actually seen this movie, but apparently it was very, very popular. It actually influenced two characters. The movie's Cape Fear, and apparently it influenced the gimmicks of Bray Wyatt and Waylon Mercy.
yeah.
Uh, I never actually seen the movie. Have you?
Yeah, it was like very backwoodsy type of thing, which makes sense because that's what their characters are. Um, yeah, that's the only way I can describe it is like they were like a backwoods cult type thing, with a mix of Manson,
Yeah,
very culty with the family, looking for a family type feel. Um, those are always creepy and weird, but they always work.
100%. And I think by far, so Waylon Mercy, and just as reference, he was Danny Spivey in WCW, part of the Twin Towers. They gave him the gimmick. Apparently, he was supposed to have a title push, but it just didn't go over. And when a character gives that much deep intellectual thought, sometimes it just gets over the heads of actual wrestling fans. It didn't work for Waylon Mercy. Bray Wyatt, it did. And wow, I mean, they went all out. He was immediately pushed as a superstar, started feuding with John Cena, eventually won the title, headline
Mhm.
WrestleMania. And to this day, I mean, as far as like ring psychology, I mean, I know, rest in peace, rest in peace. But he,
Mhm.
I mean, talk about just a gimmick that had such an impact. It wasn't necessarily long time wise, but it still has an impact. And obviously now with the Wyatt Six. So this was,
Yeah.
yeah, this was wow. One of the greatest games probably of all time.
I think it was a huge success. And that's the thing is these things can be hit or miss. Like look what happened. And it's a huge impact right now. And it was so great. They brought it back as the Wyatt Six, which I really hope they take full advantage and bring on more storylines with that.
Sure. Absolutely. All right. The next one, and this one's a little bit obvious, but turned into one of the greatest tag teams of all time. So Demolition, who apparently was influenced by Kiss, and it's a dead giveaway with just the makeup and the attire.
Uh,
But you know what though? I mean, this one actually worked. Especially as a kid. I mean, back then this was like the cartoonish area. Having them in that face paint, they were always heels. They with everything from the tongues, the way they dress, and everything like that. But you know what? Like, it turned into one of the greatest tag teams of all time. And you know, back then where tag teams were such a staple. You know, an actual tag team, not just two guys singles that just kind of came together. So yeah, what do you have to think? What do you think about this angle?
Um, I am a big fan of Demolition. And that's just by association too with my brother who loves them so much. Like that, those are his guys. So I know a little bit more like of a deeper dive. I know Vince um did not sign Road Warriors. So instead he made his own. And it was his sort of version of that tag team. Um, and their makeup is very reminiscent of Kiss. But they're also inspired by Mad Max's sequel, The Road Warrior, specifically the character Lord Humongous, and which is their mask and just overall appearance. Um, but I think they're so cool. I mean, it's a little S&M too. So
That's yeah, that totally is. And again, I think maybe for the kids, they probably went over their heads, but I think the
yeah.
adults were like, oh yeah. And that now that we're both old, we're like, oh okay. And that transitions into the next tag team we're about to talk about. One, because they're a tag team. Two, you mentioned the Road Warriors, so we're talking about Legion of Doom.
Hmm.
So again, listen, and I'm gonna be fully transparent. I've always been a TV show guy. I actually am not as big of a movie guy. Did you watch this film,
What? The
Mad Max?
Mad Max? Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. And so you saw the resemblance between, with Legion of Doom.
It's very it was just the overall theme of it because it was so apocalyptic. And it was just like dirty and grungy. They were in the middle of a desert just fighting.
Yeah.
So I can see it because I feel like because that was such a big movie at that time, of course that was going to inspire um I guess a vibe. And fun fact about them is because they were Road Warriors and then Legion of Doom. Road Warriors came in the early to mid 80s and they were the first wrestling gimmick to be inspired by a movie.
Oh wow.
So, yeah. So yeah, they're really cool. I really like them. I love when they come out with the spikes
Sure.
and the makeup, and Hawk and Animal were just really cool guys anyway. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
and talking about, I mean, everyone knows that we're huge college football fans. The Georgia Bulldogs, on the
Yep.
sidelines, that they wear them the shoulder pads of the spikes, and I love it.
If I was a football player, that's how I would wear my shoulder pads.
That's what I'm talking about. Oh man. All right, next one. And there's two different gimmicks that he was he that he had inspiration for. But Lex Luger. So I'll explain the Mr. USA in a second. But the original Lex Luger, obviously Lex Luthor, which I just thought was funny. But listen, he was a freak of an athlete. I mean, just a big time bodybuilder. And I think when they came up with that at the time, like it was kind of like I mean, they played off something that worked, obviously, in pop culture, and I think everyone read Superman. So, what did you initially think about, like, Lex Luger, from the Lex Luthor aspect?
I really liked him. I like the name.
Yeah.
That's all I really know is the origin of his name. I know he got Lex from Lex Luthor, from the comics. I also saw in like a shoot interview that he got Luger because it was um German for like weapon or gun,
Okay.
and he was a fan of Magnum PI. kind
Oh,
of thing, but I don't know where he got the actual character inspiration. I just knew the name and inspiration, which kind of, I mean, it ties in as an 80s character. So, but I love Lex. He's awesome.
absolutely, for sure. All right. And I'm going to explain the next part because his second, when he came to WWE, he became Mr. USA. Okay. Years ago, okay, obviously I'm a big time ECW head. I watched a shoot interview with Raven, and he actually specifically mentioned where certain gimmicks kind of came from. And I'm going to go over a couple of them later on this list. One thing he specifically said was the Mr. USA, that's Vince McMahon. And he
Really?
basically, yeah. So vicariously, he obviously didn't have the same, he wasn't a wrestler, quote unquote. So he pushed that over to Lex Luger. Because remember, Lex Luger came out when Lex Luger came to WWF at the time, he was the narcissist, which is stupid. But then they did Mr. USA, and then they had the Lex Express, and he was traveling on that bus. And yeah, that he was basically Vince McMahon, which I just thought was
Oh, I
hilarious.
remember that.
Yeah,
I remember the Lex Express.
absolutely. Because Vince McMahon's a very patriotic person. So
Was this when he was wearing the American flag trunks?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So all that was basically Vince McMahon just through an actual wrestler. In this case, was Lex Luger.
Hmm.
So yeah, kind of cool. All right, awesome. All right. Next one, and this one's smack in the face, obvious, and especially when he first came out with the actual mask. Uh, Originally, it was Big Van Vader, and he actually literally had like a mask when it came on. This is obviously influenced by Darth Vader. I just this one's like kind of a smack you in the face. Yeah, this is what we're going for.
I like I love Vader and I love
Oh,
that
I love him. Yeah, absolutely, for
it's
sure.
time. It's time. It's Vader time.
For sure. And you know what's a fun fact about this? He was also in Boy Meets World on multiple episodes. So
I remember.
yeah. So yeah, no, I love it. It's just this one's a little more kind of smacked in the face, but little story about him. I mean, Leon White played football at Colorado. He actually played for the Los Angeles Rams. I don't think a lot of people realize that. So he was in the NFL. And like a lot of other athletes, the NFL stands for not for long. He didn't have that long of a career, so he decided to do professional wrestling. And I think I'm not sure exactly who came up with it, but I just know obviously like the motivation was, Darth Vader, and Star Wars till this day is still has such an influence on our society. So, that's kind of where this came
Mhm.
from.
I have a I was doing a little bit of digging on this one too. I also read when he started wrestling in Japan, he was also based off of a Japanese folklore legend. Um, the character, I don't know if it was Vader exactly, but it was part of who he was supposed to be like. And it
Gotcha.
was some kind of protector of the village that fought for like 72 hours straight and was supposed to be like this big old superhuman type thing. So
Oh wow,
I don't know.
nice. No, that's really cool. And I know he was he was over in Japan, so that totally
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Now, next one, and again, going back to the shoot interview I saw, $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase.
Yeah.
When I found this, when I found this out, I was like, yeah, this makes total sense. This is also based on Vince McMahon because he's very proud about his money and he likes to shove it around and pump his chest out. And when I saw this, like it just like snapped my head. I was like, this makes total sense. And I just thought that was hilarious. Yeah, that's what that and part of that student review. I mean, I strongly recommend watching it, but yeah, it was yeah, Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man is based on Vince McMahon.
Do you know the actual story behind it?
Go ahead, tell me.
Um, Bruce Pritchard and Vince McMahon were on a plane and they were in first class. And there was a man sitting behind Vince smoking a cigarette at the time where you could smoke on planes. And Vince turned around and said, "Hey, I'll give you $100 if you put it out." And the guy's like, "No, I paid for it. I'm gonna smoke." And then he goes, "I'll give you two." And this went on. And Bruce said, finally, Vince was like, look, man, I tell me your price and I'll pay for it. I'll pay for your seat and give you more. So I think they ended up being at $1,000 for him to put out a cigarette and not smoke for the rest of the flight and pay him for a seat. And Bruce said that he pulled out his wallet, gave him like $1,000 cash. The guy didn't smoke a cigarette the entire flight. And he looked at Vince and goes, "You are $1 million man." And Vince turns around and replies back, "Everyone's got a price," which is one of the taglines for Ted DiBiase. And that's where they thought of that character. How
Wow.
cool is that?
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. That is really, really cool. Wow. Now, I didn't know that backstory. I just remember Raven saying that and it just made sense. But yeah, that actually puts an exclamation point on it.
It's so you can totally see that.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. That's why I liked it. It just put two and two together.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next one. I keep talking about him, and now I am going to reveal because he actually said it himself in speaking. Raven, obviously, and I don't know if you remember this, he was Johnny Polo in WWF. He was basically a manager for the Mounties.
He was like the rich guy, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And then when he came over to, and he eventually came to ECW, started wrestling. So again, feel free to watch his shooting review. It's awesome. Raven is actually Paul Heyman.
What?
Yeah. It's Paul Heyman. Yeah, right. That was just mind blowing. And basically they came up to create the character together. But again, it's Paul Heyman. He kind of has like a certain edge to him, if you want to call it that, if you will, right? And he basically like, he kind of came up together and he said, "Yeah, look, this is all Paul. It's just through me." And obviously, like, it kind of morphed into like what Raven did. It was very poetic and everything like that. But yeah, Paul Heyman. How crazy is that?
I had no idea because you think of Raven, you think of Edgar Allan Poe, obviously, and we knew that he was like that very stoic character.
Yeah.
But when he spoke so eloquently and so deep. I read something a while ago that I'm not sure if it was that character specifically or he got a little bit of inspiration was from Bodie from Point Break, Patrick Swayze's character, where he was kind of like very zen and whatever. But I never even thought of it to be Paul Heyman. I mean, they are great on the mic, so
yeah, and creative geniuses, absolute creative geniuses. Raven, fun fact, he actually came up with Blue Meanie because he was watching I forget what movie it was. I think it was Yellow Submarine. And that's how he came up with like Blue Meanie for another character. He actually wrote storylines for other wrestlers as well. And yeah, they actually wanted him to be a writer, but he didn't. He actually wanted to wrestle. But one of the most brilliant minds, and again, it's very parallel to Paul. So Paul Heyman, I was very blown away by that. But yeah, it was very special.
I don't feel like people realize how much of an impact that he had in wrestling and his reign. And I feel like he is so underrated.
Yeah, well, by far, 1,000,000%. And that's why, again, and from a creative standpoint, this is part of the reason why I still love ECW is because creatively it was by far the best. So, and Paul was behind it, and Paul kind of created for everybody. So
makes sense. Oh man, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
You taught me something, I taught you something. Okay. Okay, and the next, so Edge, going back to, and remember, and I'm think about when Edge first came out, right? That you think you know
Are
me.
we thinking of the Brood or before the Brood?
So technically it was before the Brood, but remember, like, it was You Think You Know Me, and it kind of had this dark music, and they used to run these vignettes of him like in back alleys and everything.
Yeah.
Okay. This is according to Raven, but it was motivated by Raven. He was basically Raven, but in WWE.
That makes sense because they were both kind of angsty and loners.
Exactly. Yeah, that's and as soon as he said that, I was like, wow, that's crazy. And again, talking about guessing motivation, remember the Attitude Era, and Paul Heyman said this many, many times, was based on ECW. So, I mean, they stole the entire theme from ECW, but again, wrestlers, again, we talk about steal like an artist. Yeah, totally. You can steal like an artist. And yeah, so Edge was actually based on what Raven was in ECW. So, and I just thought that was really interesting.
I didn't even think to put two and two together. And it does make sense because every promotion has their own version of their teams or their guys. And oh, I didn't even think about that. All I knew was where Edge got his name from. That's it. I didn't know where his actual character development came from. So
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is. All right. That actually wraps up this episode. This is a lot of fun. Listen, feel free to chime in if you have additional stories to some of the guys that we mentioned, or if you have stories behind motivation of other characters. I'd love to hear it. I think Des would love to. Des and I actually both learned from each other on this episode. I'm sure we can learn from you as well. Please DM us at the Chutes and Ladders. You can like, share, and subscribe. Tune in to our next episode. And until then, have an awesome week.
Bye, friends.